Hello everyone. Today inshallah we are going to continue with the process costing, or the title process costing. Of course, in the previous lectures we have discussed the process costing procedures for different scenarios, and we have considered of course the most difficult scenario, or the most sophisticated or complicated scenario, where we have a beginning work in process inventory and an ending work in process inventory. Of course, if we have an ending work in process inventory, we need to use, as we said, the 5-step procedures. If we have a beginning work in process inventory, we need to designate or determine what is the inventory valuation method to be used, whether it is the weighted average or the first in, first out. Of course, all our focus in the 3 scenarios were according to the first department, which was the assembly department. Of course, according to our illustration, the Pacific department, or the Pacific Electronics organization, have 2 departments. The first was the assembly department, and we have seen what would be the process costing for this department. Now let us shift our concern to the testing department. Of course, according to the continuation of the same illustration for the Pacific Electronics, of course we have the assembly department. After the assembly department completes and transfers out the units from the assembly department, it would be transferred to the testing department. In the testing department, conversion costs would be added evenly during the process, which was the same as the assembly department. But the direct materials in the testing department would be added at the end of the production process. Therefore, as we can see here, the direct materials are added at the end of the process. Of course, we need to consider, so according to the testing department, what would be the different categories or cost categories that we need to consider? Of course, we said the first point, or the first thing that we need to determine in using, or in let us say in applying process costing, is to determine what are the different cost categories. And of course we said, according to process costing, we categorize costs according to when they are added to the production process. Therefore, according now to the testing department, now we are going to focus on the testing department, not the assembly department. We have finished focusing on the assembly department. Now we need to consider the testing department. Now, according to the testing department, what are the different categories that we are going to determine and categorize? The conversion, because as we are seeing here, that conversion costs are added evenly. Therefore, all the conversion costs is one category. The second category is the direct materials. Why? Because the direct materials is added at the end of the production process. If, for instance, the direct materials were also added evenly during the process, we would only have one category. But in this case, the direct materials is added at a different time than the conversion cost. Therefore, we would have conversion costs as a cost category and direct materials as another cost category. Is these only the 2 cost categories that we are going to consider in this case? Excellent. Excellent. Therefore, in the testing department, we are not going to start any new products. Or let us say the testing department, or the objective of the testing department is not starting the production, or it is not the starting of new units, but it is only it focuses upon, let us say, admitting or having or taking what have been started in the assembly department. Therefore, there would be another category in the testing department that is concerned with the units that were transferred from the assembly department to the testing department. Of course, this category always, this category of costs would be added at the beginning of the production process, because this would be the most rational decision to be made, because we know that the assembly department would transfer to the testing department, and the testing department would first of all use these transferred units in order to add on them the conversion cost and the direct materials cost in this department. Therefore, the transfer or the transferred units or the costs that are transferred from the assembly department to the testing department is another category that is always added at the beginning of the production process. In this case, we would have 3 different categories. Why 3? Because as we are seeing from the illustration, we have conversion costs that are added evenly. We have, this is category number 1, let us say. We have direct materials that are added at the end of the production process. This is the second category. And as we can see here, there is another or a third category which is called transferred in costs, which are the costs of the units that have been completed in the assembly department and transferred to the testing department. Therefore, the testing department does not start new units or does not start a production process on new units. It starts or completes the production process on started or already started units that has been started in the assembly department. Any questions? Therefore, in any department that comes after, let us say, another department, it would have a new or an additional cost category, which is the transferred in cost. Always the transferred in cost would be added at the beginning of the production process, always. Any questions? Therefore, we are going to use the same 5-step procedures in the testing department. And we are going to use the same inventory evaluation or valuation methods that we took in the assembly department. No, or there would be nothing, or there would be no differences between the assembly department and the testing department in the procedure. The only difference is that we are going to use or that we are going to add another category. This is the only difference. Therefore, let us consider the testing department now. According to the data for the testing department, we have work in process as a beginning inventory. Of course, here we are going to consider the third month, which is the month of March, which is the same as case number 3 for the assembly department. Therefore, in March 1, we had 240 as beginning work in process. 33,600 were the transferred in costs. What do you mean by transferred in costs? These are the costs that were incurred in the assembly department and transferred from the assembly department to the testing department. Of course, for the 240 units. And of course, the direct materials as of March 1 was 0%. Why 0%? Excellent, because as we just saw, direct materials are added at the end of the production process. Therefore, if the percentage of completion for these units were 62.5, this means that they took 0% of the direct materials, because the direct materials are added at the end of the production process. Of course, the conversion cost would be or the percentage of completion, because the conversion costs are added evenly upon the manufacturing process or the production process. Therefore, it would be 62.5%. Now, transferred in, it is not started as we took in assembly. We cannot call these number of units as started, because they are not started in the testing department, but they are transferred from the assembly department. Therefore, transferred in during March, 400 units. If you remember, in the assembly department, we have completed and finished, or completed and transferred out in the assembly department in March, the same amount of units. Therefore, they were transferred from the assembly department to the testing department, this is the number that were started and completed, or not, let us not say started and completed because we had beginning inventory. Therefore, this is the number of units that was completed in March in the assembly department and transferred to the testing department. Of course, in March number, in month number 3 or March, we have completed and transferred out 440 units. Of course, here the testing department is the last production process. Therefore, we could say that the completed and transferred out are finished goods. Therefore, the finished goods here in March would be 440 units. Of course, from the 440 or from the 640 units, if 440 were finished, therefore 200 would stay or would be still in the process or in the manufacturing process as an ending work in process. Of course, the ending work in process or the ending inventory for the work in process for the testing department has taken, of course, 100% of transferred in costs, because the transferred in costs are added at the beginning of the manufacturing process. Of course, 0% of direct materials, because the percentage of completion according to the conversion cost is only 80%. Therefore, it took none of the direct materials. Of course, we are going to treat the transferred in costs as if they are some sort of direct material. As we can see here, the transferred in costs are treated as if they are some sort of direct materials that are added at the beginning of the manufacturing process. If you assume this, then you would not have any problems in proceeding with the different steps or in proceeding with the process costing system. Any questions? Now let us consider, of course, the procedure of the process costing for the testing department according to this data. But of course, we need to consider that the transferred out during March, the transferred in during March, the 400 units here had two different costs. One according to the weighted average cost and other according to the first in, first out. Therefore, we are going to see the procedure according to the weighted average cost or the weighted average cost method in the testing department, and then we are going to see what is the procedure if the first in, first out method was to be used. Of course, according to our calculation in the assembly department, the 400 units or the transferred in costs once was $52,000 according to the weighted average method, and another time it was $52,480 if the first in, first out method was used. Therefore, first of all, we are going to use the $52,000, which is the weighted average costing method, and then we are going to use the $52,480. It would be the same. As we said, the procedure for the process costing, the 5 steps, the inventory valuation methods, everything would be the same. The only difference between the testing department and the assembly department is that in the testing department we would have another category or an additional category of costs, which is the transferred in costs, which will be treated as if it is one or some sort of direct materials that is added at the beginning of the production process. Now let us see the different steps. Of course, first of all, we are going to consider the weighted average method. Therefore, step number 1 and step number 2 would be, first of all, summarizing the physical output or the physical units output, and then calculating the equivalent units. Of course, according to the weighted average costing method, we are going to calculate the equivalent units for all the work that has been done up to date, whether it was incurred or whether this work was done in this period or in previous periods. We are not going to separate the two as we have said in the past. Therefore, step number 1, we need to answer 2 questions. From where did these units come from and where did they go? 240 were as beginning work in process, 400 was transferred in March. Therefore, the total units to account for is 640. From this 640, now we need to answer the second question. From the 640, 440 were completed and transferred out as finished goods, and 200 were still in the work in process, or were still in process at the end of March. Therefore, the total of 440 and 200 would most definitely equal 640, which is the total number of units that are or that has been accounted for. Of course, these two numbers should always equal, the 640 with the 640. Now, we need to go to step number 2. As we can see here, the steps are the same. We are not adding anything new. But now, we are going to calculate the equivalent units not only for 2 categories, but for 3 categories: the transferred in, the direct materials, and the conversion costs. Therefore, for the 440, we said that the transferred in cost has taken 100% of the transferred in cost, because the 440 are completed and finished. Therefore, it took 100% of the transferred in cost, 100% of the direct materials, and 100% of the conversion cost. Therefore, always the equivalent units for the completed and transferred out is the same as the physical units, as we can see here, 440 for the all, or for all categories. Now let us take into consideration the 200 units as the ending work in process. Of course, as the ending work in process 200, if they are transferred or if they are taken into consideration at the beginning of, or let us say at the end of March, therefore it has taken 100% of the transferred in cost. Therefore, always the transferred in cost for any, let us say, any unit within the manufacturing process in any current period is 100%, because the transferred in cost is treated as a direct material that is added at the beginning of the manufacturing process. Therefore, it would be 200. 200 multiplied by 100%, 200. Now, the direct materials, on the other hand, in this case, of course, because sometimes, or some, let us say, cases, we would have the direct materials added maybe at the 40% point, or the 10% point, or let us say the 60% point. Therefore, we need to consider the case before assuming the categories or assuming the or calculating the equivalent units. In this case, the direct materials is added at the end of the manufacturing process. Therefore, if only these units have reached 80%, therefore they did not take any of the direct materials, because they stopped at the 80%, and at the 100% they would have taken the direct materials in total. But because they stopped at the 80% point, therefore they took 0% of the direct materials. Therefore, as we can see here, 0% multiplied by 200 units, it would be 0. On the other hand, the conversion costs would be calculated, because the conversion costs are added evenly upon the manufacturing process, and the percentage of completion of the 200 units were 80%. Therefore, 80% multiplied by 200 would be 160. Of course, adding up the equivalent units would give us the total equivalent units for each category separately. Now, let us go to step number 3, 4, and 5. Of course, step number 3 is the summarization of the total cost to account for, which are the costs that are incurred as beginning work in process inventory, and the costs that are added within this month or within this period. Of course, as we can see here, the transferred in cost is 33,600, direct materials is 0, and 18,000 as conversion costs. While as the production costs that were incurred in this specific period were as follows: 52,000. Of course, the 52,000 is according to the weighted average, as we said. Therefore, this method or this illustration is according to the weighted average. We are going to use the weighted average. Of course, the assembly department used the weighted average, and the testing department in this case also used the weighted average method. Therefore, the transferred in cost for the cost that has been added within this month, the cost of the 400 units that were transferred in were 52,000. Of course, the direct material is at 13,200, and the conversion cost is the 48,600. As we can see here, this is step number 3, or the summarization of the costs from the beginning and from what has been incurred in this period. Step number 4, calculating the equivalent or the cost per equivalent unit. Of course, if we are using the weighted average method, we are going to divide the total costs by the total equivalent units. Why? Because this method of inventory valuation does not separate between the cost that has been incurred in a previous year or a previous period and the cost that has been incurred in this current period. Therefore, we are going to take all the cost that has been incurred. Therefore, as we can see here, we are using the 85,600, which is the total. We are using the 13,200, which is the total. We are using the 66,600, which is the total. And we are going to divide by the total number of equivalent units, whether these equivalent units were started in the previous period or within this period. Therefore, we are going to divide divide by 640, 440, and 600. Of course, these amounts were taken or were calculated from step number 2. Of course, as we can see here, we have calculated the cost per equivalent unit. Now, we have the number of equivalent units for the ending work in process and for the transferred out units for the different categories, and we have the cost per equivalent unit. Therefore, step number 5 is the main objective of, or is the main goal of any process costing system, is the calculation of the ending work in process and the finished goods or the transferred out units costs. Therefore, as we can see here, step number 5 is the assignment of costs. Therefore, we have completed and transferred out by the or 440 units. Of course, the equivalent units for the transferred in cost is 440 multiplied by the cost that has been calculated in step number 4. 440, which is the equivalent units for the direct materials, multiplied by the cost per equivalent unit, and 440 units, which is the equivalent units for the conversion cost, multiplied by the cost per equivalent unit. Adding up these amounts would give us 120,890, which is the cost of the units that has been completed. This is the cost of the 440 units that has been completed and transferred out from the testing department into the warehouses as finished goods. Of course, the work in process, the 200 units, of course, is in step number 2. We calculated the equivalent units for the 200 units. For the transferred in, it was 200. For the direct materials, it was 0. For the conversion cost, it was 160. Of course, these equivalent units would be multiplied by the cost per equivalent unit in order to calculate the cost of the ending work in process, which is in this case $44,510. Therefore, the costs that would stay in the work in process account for the testing department at the end of March would be $44,510. Of course, according or from an accounting perspective, we are going, or from, let us say, from a T account perspective or from an accounting perspective, we have incurred, we have added 165,400 onto the work in process testing department account. For 120,890 were taken from the work in process testing department and were transferred onto another account, which is the finished goods inventory. And of course, if we deduct from the 165,400 120,890, the amount that would be, or that would still be in the account, would be 44,510, which is the cost of the ending work in process. Any questions? As we can see here, we did not change anything. The procedure is the same, the concepts are the same, everything is the same. The only difference is that we have added a new category, which is the transferred in costs. Now let us consider the same example, but using the first in, first out method. Of course, here in this illustration, we are going to assume that the first in, first out method was used by the assembly department as well as the testing department. Therefore, we are going to calculate according to the transferred in cost for the 400 units by the amount of 52,480, I think, or something like this. So therefore, in the first in, first out, we need to consider that there should be a separation between the cost that has been incurred in this current period and the cost that has been incurred in the previous period. Because according to the first in, first out method, we are going to assume that the first unit that has been completed and transferred out are the units that has been started from a previous period, which is the beginning work in process. Therefore, as we can see here, we have 240 as beginning work in process, 400 as transferred in during the current period. Therefore, the total to account for is 640. Now we are going to answer the question, 640 units, where did they go? Of course, we know that 440 has been transferred out, has been completed and transferred out. But according to the FIFO, we need to separate whether they have started in this period or started within previous periods. Of course, the assumption according to the first in, first out, that the 240 units that was as beginning inventory was first completed. Therefore, from the 440, 240 had the origin from, or has the origin of the beginning inventory that has been started in the previous period. And of course, in order to continue to 400, we would assume that 200 units would be started or would be, let us say, transferred in this month and completed also in this month. Of course, why did I say transferred in? Because as we said, in the testing department, we do not start units. We only accept that the units that has been transferred from the assembly department. Therefore, the 200 units, according to the first in, first out, were transferred in this period and finished in this period. Therefore, these two would most definitely equal the 440, which are the total units that has been completed and transferred out and finished and transferred into the warehouses or finished goods inventory. Of course, if 440 were finished, therefore we have 200 as unfinished or work in process ending inventory. Therefore, the 200, as we can see here, plus the 200 plus the 240 would most definitely equal the 640, which is the total units that has been accounted for. Now let us calculate, or which is step number 2, calculate the equivalent units for each cost category, which is the transferred in direct materials conversion cost, for each different, let us say, line item of the origin of the units. Of course, we are going to calculate the equivalent units for the 240, for the 200, and for the 200. Of course, in this case, we are going to calculate the equivalent units for the work done within this period only. Why? Because the cost for this period only would be allocated on these equivalent units. Why? Because as we said in the last time, the cost of the beginning inventory or the cost that has been incurred in previous months or previous periods would be directly allocated onto the end or the transferred out or the completed and finished goods. Therefore, we are going to calculate the equivalent units according to the work done that has been done within this period. Of course, the transferred in cost according to the beginning inventory, it was 100%. 100% incurred in what? In the previous period. Therefore, in this period, how much would it incur? 0%. If 100% were incurred in the previous period, therefore in this period it would have no addition in transferred in cost. Therefore, it would be 0%, or let us say 100% minus 100% multiplied by 240. Now, for the direct materials, we said that the percentage of completion for this beginning inventory category is 0%. Therefore, in the previous year or the previous period, it took 0% of the direct materials, correct? Therefore, in this period, because we said that the 240 would be the first units to be finished. Therefore, if it took 0% in the previous period, therefore it would take 100% in this period in order to be finished. Therefore, 100% minus 0%, it would equal 100%. Therefore, 100% multiplied by 240 would be 240. Now, for the conversion costs, we said that the beginning working process for the conversion costs, or the percentage of completion for the conversion costs, were 62.5%. What do we mean by 62.5% for the beginning inventory? It means that the cost that has been incurred for the conversion, or in regarding the conversion costs, would be 62.5% that has been incurred in the previous year, or in the previous month, or in the previous period. Therefore, in this period, we are going to incur the completion of the 62.5%. Therefore, 100% minus 62.5 would 40. Anyways. Therefore, the 100% minus the 62.5% multiplied by the 240 units would equal the 90 units as equivalent units for the work done that has been incurred in this month or in this period. Of course, for the 200, it has been transferred in this month and completed in this month. Therefore, it took 100% of all cost categories in this period. Therefore, 100% multiplied by 200, 100% multiplied by 200, 100% multiplied by 200. Always for the transferred in and finished within the same period would have 100% of all cost categories. Of course, for the 200, according to our illustration or according to our data, it took 100% of the transferred in cost within this period, 200. Therefore, it took 0% in this period in regarding of the direct materials. Therefore, 0% multiplied by 200 would be 0. And it took 80% of conversion cost. Therefore, 80% multiplied by 200 would equal 160. Now, we are going to add up all the equivalent units for the work done in this period. We would have the total number of equivalent units for the course or for the work done in this current period. Now let us go to step number 3 to 5. Of course, the same steps. Step number 3, we are going to summarize the cost or summarize the production cost. Of course, we have cost that has been incurred on the beginning inventory, and we have cost that has been incurred within this period. Therefore, the cost that has been incurred in the beginning inventory would be $33,600, $0 and $18,000. And for the cost that has been added within this period, $52,480, which is the cost of the 400 units that were transferred from the assembly department according to what we have calculated in the previous lecture. According to the first in, first out method. 13,200 for the direct materials, 48,600 for the conversion cost, and of course we have added up all the costs in order to have the total cost to account for by the amount of 165,880. Now we need to calculate the cost per equivalent unit. Of course, in calculating the cost per equivalent unit, we are going to divide the costs by the total or the number of equivalent units. Of course, according to the first in, first out, we are going only to use the cost that has been incurred in this current period only. Why? Because as we said, the cost that has been incurred in the previous period would be directly assigned to the transferred out or the completed and transferred out units. Therefore, as we can see here, we took the 52,480, the 13,200, and the 48,600, and we are going to divide them or divide these costs by the number of equivalent units for the work done in this period or in this current period only. Therefore, we would divide them by 400, 440, 450. How did we get these numbers? From step number 2 that has been calculated in the previous slide. Of course, as we can see here, we have calculated the cost per equivalent unit for the transferred end cost, the cost for the direct materials per equivalent unit, and the cost per equivalent unit for the conversion cost. Now, step number 5, which is the main objective of any process costing system, is to calculate the cost of the transferred out or the completed and transferred out units, or in this case, because we are talking about the last production process or production facility or production, let us say, department, therefore it would be finished goods, and we need to calculate the cost that would stay or would still stay in the work in process or would stay in the work in process account for the testing department. Therefore, first of all, we need to calculate these two categories, the completed and transferred out. This is the first category. And the work in process ending, this is the second category. Of course, according to the first and first out, first of all, for the completed and transferred out, we said according to the first and first out, that the cost that has been incurred in the previous period would be assigned directly to the completed and transferred out. Therefore, this is the start of our calculation for the cost for the 440 units. Therefore, from the 440 units, there were 240 units as beginning inventory or work in process inventory with the following costs. As we can see here, these are the costs of the beginning inventory. Of course, we have added some costs in this month. Therefore, in order to complete the beginning work in process and transfer them from a beginning or still in work in process units into finished units. Therefore, we have added 0 equivalent units multiplied, of course, by the cost per equivalent unit. Therefore, we have added $0 as transferred in costs in this period. We have added to 140 equivalent units in this period by the $30 that is the cost per equivalent unit, and we have added in this period 90 equivalent units multiplied by $108, which is the cost per equivalent unit. Therefore, we have added in this period 16,920. Therefore, the 240 units that has been started in a previous period with cost of 51,600 were added in this period 16,900, or were added upon 16,920, which is the work that was done in this current period. Therefore, the cost of the 240 units in order to be completed and finished 100% is 68,520. Is the 68,520 is the cost of the completed and transferred units, or the total completed and transferred units? This is only one part, or the first part of the completed and transferred out units. Because as we said, that we have 440 units that has been completed. 240 were started in the previous year or the previous period and finished in this period. And we have 200 units that were not started, but transferred in within this period and finished also in this period. Therefore, we have calculated the equivalent units for this category, which is 200 equivalent units for all the cost categories. Multiplied by the cost per equivalent unit, we would have 53,840, which means that the cost of producing and finishing 200 units is 53,840. Now, of course, we need to know what is the cost for the total 440, not only for the 240, not only for the 200, but for the 440 as in total. Therefore, we would add the 68,520 and the 53,840 in order to get 122,360. This is the cost of the goods that would be, or the units that would be completed and transferred out into the warehouses as finished goods. The last category that we need to consider or we need to calculate the cost for is the ending work in process inventory. Of course, the ending work in process inventory, we have calculated the equivalent units for this category, 200 for the first cost category, 0 for the second cost category, 160 for the second cost category, multiplied by the cost per equivalent unit that we calculated in step number 4 would give us the amount of $43,520. This is the cost that will stay in the work in process account at the end of March. Why? Because these units are still in process, therefore they would stay in the work in process in the testing department. Of course, we have added, in this month, we have added 165,000, or let us say there would be in this month $165,880 in the work in process account. We have taken or transferred from this work in process into the finished goods inventory the amount of 122,360, which means that the amount of 43,520 would be the balance of the work in process for the testing department at the end of the period. Any questions? Of course. The ending of any work in process would be the beginning for the second period. Any questions? Of course, as we can see here, nothing has changed. Now let us consider two small points. The first is the use of a standard costing system. Of course, we said, or according to the illustrations that we have taken, for the Pacific Electronics illustration or example, all the costs that we have been talking about are actual costs. Therefore, in this case, this is an actual costing system. But what if an organization wants to use a standard costing system which was introduced in chapter number 7 and chapter number 8? So what do you think would be different than what we took? If we need to use a standard costing system instead of using an actual costing system, what do you think? Instead of using actual costs, we are going to use standard costs.
We will have budget.
Therefore, we are, before beginning the month, we would have been, or we would determine the cost of the equivalent unit. Therefore, as we can see here, we are, according to what we took, we are calculating the equivalent unit after we have known the costs of the different categories, correct? But in a standard costing system, we would have determined the cost of the different categories before the start of the period, because we are using a standard costing system. Therefore, if we have determined the cost of the let us say that the cost of the different cost categories, it means that we could calculate the cost per equivalent unit before the start of the period. Therefore, instead of using actual costs and actual amounts, we are going to use the estimated amounts or the estimated cost per equivalent units. This would be the only difference between what we took and what would be the case if we are using a standard costing system. The only difference, instead of using actual, we are going to use standard or estimated costs. The last point is the hybrid costing system. Of course, the hybrid costing system is a system that considers more than one, or let us say characteristics, or it is a costing system that has a characteristics of job costing as well as the process costing. Of course, according to some of the problems that we are going to solve, we are going to take the case of a hybrid costing system, which is called the operation costing system. In that time, inshallah, we are going to give you some of the pointers on an operation costing system, which is a hybrid costing system that mixes some of the characteristics of job costing and process costing. This would be for today, inshallah. We are going to start solving the problems next time, inshallah. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.